Good afternoon. Thank you so much for investing your time with us and joining the Digital Riga conference. My name is Gunda Reire. I'm advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Latvia, and I will be chairing this panel discussion of the Riga conference under the title Democracy, Technologies and Infodemic. Today, we will be talking about the big trends we need to keep our eyes on that directly impact every aspect of human life. We can already see both disruptive and the highly creative nature of technology development. And a vivid example is modern information technology. In this panel discussion, we will cover two broad themes, and we will try to stick them together, namely the exponential speed of technology, and secondly, the infodemic, which is a phenomenon which combines technology, pandemic, and rapid spread of both accurate and inaccurate information. Therefore, we will ask questions about the risk of turning a blessing of tech development into a curse and give prospects for technology development that doesn't have to be addressed as a pure threat, but rather as an opportunity for humankind to improve and to empower itself. It is my pleasure now to introduce our speakers for today's discussion. We have Liga Raita-Rosenthal, who is Microsoft's Senior Director of European Cybersecurity Policy. Liga, welcome. Nice to see you. I'm also delighted to introduce Professor Filippo Menzer, who is Director of the Observatory on Social Media of Indiana University. There, Phil, I'm happy to see you. Hannes Krause, Head of Strategic Communication at the Government Office of the Republic of Estonia. Hello, Hannes. And here in the studio, we have Eva Ilves, who is Advisor to the President of Latvia for Information and Digital Policy. And let's get started. And I would like to start with Liga. And I want to say that technological development has an enormous potential, but we also see a temptation to blame technology as one of the main culprits for societal problems. Although, in fact, technologies are neither good nor bad, they're neutral. And the real question is about people's intentions and about people's ability to adapt themselves and help others to do the same. Tech companies are important players in limiting the massive spread of disinformation and finding effective problem-solving mechanisms. And my question is, where's the right balance in responsibility between big technology companies and governments? And maybe, Liga, are there really good examples of cooperation? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having Microsoft as a partner in this conference. And I'm happy to speak on behalf of an actor who finds this space extremely important, especially when considering security and defense as is being done at wider scale at the Riga conference. This is an extremely timely topic, considering the US elections last week and the influence of that particular procedure and other democratic processes, and how disinformation is playing a larger and larger role in these democratic processes. And looking at technology and information and responsibility and how that plays a factor in daily life, there's very different directions we can go in this. And I'll briefly point out how Microsoft is looking at these issues to start with. So how do we address the technology that is behind the spread of information? And how do you address the fact that technology is very much dual use? It has so many positives and it has so many negatives. And as I sit in the seat of European government affairs for Microsoft, we look at it in many ways, both through legislative scope, how we can, as a tech company, address these issues independently, and what is the cooperation necessary to find the best solutions. So when we look at the legislative practices across the EU and how the EU member states are handling these issues, we have many different approaches, but it doesn't give a complete picture. We have the Code of Practice on Disinformation that is very much trying to address how social media addresses disinformation and misinformation. but we can look also wider how technology is looked at as a critical infrastructure and what steps could be possible in the future. We see that the EU will address this through the scope of cybersecurity in December with a wider cybersecurity package, which will also address a new network information security directive, which will address cloud as a critical infrastructure, perhaps. So we'll watch those occurrences. And we also recognize as a cloud services company that this is very important to see how we can address cloud as a very critical infrastructure across Europe and globally, especially in the current environment of the pandemic. And this is not to even go into the details of export controls and the dual use technology that is being developed. We also have to look at state behavior. And here I'm quite happy that Latvia was part of the efforts on the UN level to address disinformation and bring that to the attention of the General Assembly, as disinformation was playing a large part of the negative consequences of information spread during the COVID pandemic. But what could we do as a tech company, and what have we been doing not only in the last few months, but in the last years to look at disinformation? We look at disinformation as a part of more general approach that the tech sector can look at for defending democracy and how technology filters into democratic practices, and how democracy can be distorted through disinformation. So safeguarding the integrity of information has really long been a priority for Microsoft, and looking for the partnerships to best do that has been a priority. So enhancing digital media literacy and transparency is quite a powerful tool that we pursue. But as I mentioned earlier, the case of the US elections, not only last week, but 4 years ago, really put us in looking at the spectrum of how technology can address election security. And we do that in several ways, looking through the various products and services that Microsoft provides and additional protections. But we also look at threat intelligence sharing and how that can be done at a wider scale so that governments, customers, non-governmental organizations, all that play a part in larger democratic practices can have the highest level of protection as well. We also work with very many partners on the non-governmental side and also governmental side to see how defending electoral processes can be done. And we also look through the scope of the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace to more in detail address election security as more of a cyber norm globally. More on the technology side, we see deepfakes as something that needs to be more addressed, and thus Microsoft has developed a video authenticator, which can analyze photographs, still photographs or video, to see if there is so we could provide a confidence score to see if that kind of technology can be trusted or not. And we try to make this now more available so that individuals themselves can judge what they see. And we've done that previously before in cooperation with NewsGuard, a company that also provides more trustworthy news reporting, analyzing the sources of information. And that's we're working to have that be more readily available for all language resources, not just in English. So we also have announced new technology that can detect manipulated content in different ways. And we continue to work with academics to see how deepfakes can be addressed more widely. So in conclusion, I think that there are many opportunities to work between governments and the tech sector, and also non-governmental sector with academics and civil society to find the solutions necessary. We need to continue a dialogue, and the importance of technology and geopolitical trends is only growing. So I'm glad that it's being addressed here at the Riga conference. Thank you.
Before giving floor to Phil, I would like to ask you a short question, and maybe you can answer to it briefly. My question is about deepfakes. How widespread are these deepfakes? Because recently Reuters Institute, together with Oxford University, conducted a research on COVID-19 disinformation, and they found out that actually no examples of deep fakes can be found, but instead of this, they found cheap fakes. They call them cheap fakes, which is reconfigured information, which people tend to trust and share. And so my question is, are deepfakes in the information sphere a real and broad existing problem, or maybe they're an emerging trend which must be addressed immediately?
Well, I think here's an example of how technology and awareness go hand in hand. I think the issue of deepfakes has been popularized quite frequently by popular Obama videos and so forth, so that it's one positive example how it's gotten into the media that these are a concern and that people should be looking out for them. I think we've gotten a bit ahead of the game and they're not as readily available, but if you put them at the same level of, photo manipulation, and that a regular citizen can make a deep fake themselves, then we're a bit ahead of the game on deep fakes, I would say.
Liga, thank you very much. Now, I would like to turn to Phil, and there, Phil, I have a question to you, which may seem a little bit simple at the first glance, namely how information spreads online. We can draw analogies to pandemic, because pandemic also, it doesn't spread by itself, people spread it. And the same applies to information. It doesn't spread by itself. People are spreading this information. And actually, during the pandemic influence, during the pandemic, we saw that human behavior was influenced in really unseen manner. It triggered irrational responses. It enabled fear factor. And my question is, which are the cognitive factors, so these thinking patterns? What are those social and algorithmic factors that contribute to the vulnerability of society, social media platforms and people? Please, Phil, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gunda. Thank you for having me, and it's wonderful to be part of this panel. And your question is not simple at all. In fact, there is a complex interplay of cognitive, social, algorithmic biases, as well as manipulation that makes us vulnerable. We, at our observatory on social media, we study diffusion networks. We look at how information spreads online, and we build models as well as analyze large amounts of data to study these phenomena and see what role is played by these different factors. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share just a few slides as visual aids to present some of these factors. So I'm going to talk about 4 different factors that affect the spread. And so the first one is, in fact, social. And we all hear about echo chambers. And I'll talk about an example. Several years ago, our own lab came under attack by a disinformation campaign. I'm not going to go into the details, of course, but this network here is the kind of networks that we study. In a network like this, the nodes represent users, in this case on Twitter, and links represents how information spread. In this particular case, the purple links represent sharing of links to false claims about our lab, that we were a secret government agency spying on citizens and stuff like that, all completely fabricated. And then you can see in yellow, these are people sharing, actually debunking information, because of course these claims have been debunked, for example, in Science magazine and other reputable sources. So how does this kind of spread of disinformation fit within the broader political discussions that we have on social media? So as I said, this is from a few years ago. It was during the 2014 midterm elections. And this larger network is a snapshot of the political discussion that was happening at that time. And unfortunately, our information ecosystem is highly polarized into these echo chambers where the conservatives only retweet other conservatives. Here, links represent retweets, and the liberals only retweet other liberal people. And so the purple nodes here are the nodes in this network that I showed you earlier. These are the people sharing these false claims. And you can see that they're mostly on one side of the political spectrum. And then it's hard to see, but on the left there is a couple of orange nodes. Those are people who are sharing the debunking information. So what this picture shows us is that the fact that we put ourselves in these echo chambers makes us vulnerable, because the people who are most vulnerable to the misinformation are least likely to be exposed to debunking and fact-checking information. So we need to address this issue of our sorting of our social network into these tribes. And it's not only on the conservative side. It's been shown that in the US, conservative seems to be more vulnerable to misinformation, but our analysis shows that this happens on both sides. So people who are more partisan on more sides are vulnerable. And so one of the questions that we study in our lab is, what are the factors that affect the emergence of these echo chambers? And it turns out that the fact that you can very easily unfollow or unfriend people that you disagree with on a social media platform, and this is true of all platforms, actually highly accelerates and makes it basically inevitable that we sort ourselves in these homogeneous, polarized, segregated echo chambers. And these are ingredients, this capability of unfollowing is an ingredient that is present in all platforms. And this accelerates by order of magnitude the speed at which we sort ourselves out into this echo chamber. So this is a kind of social factor. Now let's move to cognitive. We find that the fact that we have limited attention, limited capability to process all the information that is out there plays an important role. So we build models in which we simulate agents on a social media network. They have limited attention, but the information shared by all of their friends is much more than they can process. So these agents prefer to share high quality information. And we looked at what happens when they are able to process this information versus when they're not, which is a more realistic situation. So on the left, we have an unrealistic situation where information overload is not very large and people can process what they see on their feed before deciding what to share. And we see these large nodes in this network. This represents high quality information that is more likely to go viral. On the right-hand side, we see a more realistic scenario where we only process some of the information that is out there, what we see on our feed. And even though we try to share high quality information to pay attention to it, it turns out that a lot of low quality information instead goes viral. That is represented by these small nodes here. This is low quality information that inevitably spreads virally despite our preference. So information overload and limited attention are cognitive factors that also make us vulnerable. And then in terms of algorithmic factors, well, all platforms use engagement or popularity to help decide what to show us, to rank information. And we used our models to look at the effect of that. So imagine a system like Facebook or Twitter or TikTok or whatever that ranks the things that you see on your screen. And these algorithms use popularity signal to try to detect quality. And in a system like this, we looked at algorithms that use more or less these popularity proxy signals and their effect on the overall quality, the average quality of information in the system. Again, this is a system where people prefer to share quality things, but only among the ones that they see on their screen. And it turns out that the more the algorithm uses popularity and engagement as a proxy signal, the lower the overall quality of information in the system. There is a narrow region here for a specific narrow range of attention of the individuals in our model, where a little bit of popularity bias can actually help. This is what's referred to as the wisdom of the crowds. But this is actually a narrow phenomenon. And in general, the use of popularity engagement actually harms quality. And this also affects us at the individual level. So we built we ran an experiment where people would look at news on a social media feed like Facebook or Twitter, and some of them were low credibility information, others were from high, reliable sources. And we manipulated the engagement metric, telling people how many people had shared or liked a particular article. And if people perceived something to be popular, if they thought that many other people had shared it, then they were more likely to share low credibility articles. and they were less likely to fact check or to flag for fact checking low credibility articles if they thought that they had high engagement. So mere exposure to these popularity or engagement signals also increases our vulnerability. And this is also a sort of one of those cases where you have the interplay between cognitive and social factors. And then finally, manipulation. We've been studying for several years the role of inauthentic actors such as social bots. So this is an example of a diffusion network of a particularly viral piece of fake news during the 2016 elections, the claim that the Clinton campaign was involved in satanic rituals. This was a precursor to QAnon that we all hear about today. And we see in this diffusion network that there were several influential nodes, accounts that were spreading this news and were retweeted by many, many humans that are colored in red, which means that they were highly automated. And so this is one way in which the system can be manipulated through automated or semi-automated accounts that we call social bots. And when we pull together all of these misinformation articles, hundreds of thousands of false claims, we see again the emergence of these echo chambers where the people who are sharing this misinformation in purple are more likely to be connected to other people who are also vulnerable to misinformation, and less likely to be connected to people who might share credible information, which is shown in orange here. And the more we zoom in into this information network, into the core of this network, the more we see evidence of inauthentic and automated accounts. So, so you can actually manipulate and exploit our vulnerabilities in terms of cognitive and social factors by creating these inauthentic accounts. And we build models to look at how these coordinated networks can actually suppress quality in the system. If not many humans follow them, things are fine. Here, the gray nodes are humans, and the color represents the quality of the information that they share. And the bots are shown in yellow. But if the bots are able to infiltrate a sufficient portion of the human network, as we see on the right-hand side, in fact, there is like a critical threshold. If roughly 1% of the humans follow these bots which spread low quality information, then the quality of the entire system is suppressed. We see that the humans now are colored in dark, which means that they are now flooded with low quality information and they are resharing low quality information, despite the fact that they would rather share high quality information, but they're just flooded. And so here, manipulation can really control, unfortunately, the system and suppress quality. And we found evidence of this kind of coordinated network spreading misinformation in all domains. For example, spreading misinformation about COVID, spreading misinformation about the white helmets in Syria, trying to manipulate the Hong Kong protests, also trying to manipulate cryptocurrency prices in pump and dump schemes. And in the US politics, we see networks that spread information trying to attack or support a candidate or another. Recently, there was an example of this where a bunch of teenagers in Phoenix were actually paid by a political action committee to post information supporting Trump. And a lot of it was misinformation about the elections and about the pandemic. So we see these coordinated networks manipulating our space and exploiting our vulnerabilities. In our lab, we have some tools that we developed to try to help people understand how these disinformation networks form. This is a tool called Bot Slayer, which lets people set up their own infrastructure in the cloud to detect early narratives that are being propagated by either automated or coordinated accounts. In this visualization on the bottom, this visualization is done with another tool in our lab called Hoaxy. We see a bunch of these red nodes. These are Russian bots that are trying to amplify a particular fake news video attacking Bill Browder that some people may have heard about. So this is an example of these kind of campaigns that are happening all the time. Okay, I'm gonna stop here. Sorry for taking a little bit of time. And I really look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Yes, Phil, thank you very much. And we are moving forward. And Eva, I want to ask you a question. In the era of unprecedented technological development and spread of disinformation, we actually see also a necessity of the inventory and update of democratic values. And I'm speaking here about the freedom of speech, liberty, solidarity, also openness to diversity. Such values in our rapidly changing world have already become vulnerable to manipulation and to attack. How do you see the future of technological development combined with democratic values?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Gunta, and thanks for Gunta for introduction and colleagues for layout of already quite a bit of sort of problematic aspects. And I'll probably come in a little bit from policy. And rightly you say it is a question of values. And I would actually put that this challenge, the values, I would think that in our democratic countries we still share the same values. But the question is, how do we ensure that those values are respected in those new digital environments? And information is key source for every human being actually to understand the value, to identify the value. And thus, I mean, it has been nothing new. Information has been power through centuries. It has only changed the way of appearance, right? It has been word of mouth. It has been printed, newspapers, books. It has been TV. Nowadays, it's digital. So it's in a way, it is something that has changed the appearance, but it's the same information. And I think that's why where we should sort of, like you said, we should re-look and do sort of an audit where those threats and challenges come from and what do we do about. Because technology and innovation, though if one really looks in history, actually did start with government experimenting in sort of certain labs where the innovation created the internet, right? But nowadays, mostly is innovation and all the new tools come from private sector. But we understand that the private sector or any solution come from there has a commercial motivation. The social networks are not built to better govern the people. The core function of every single one of those entities is to survive in market and to profit. And everything is good for that, including information. And that's where we understand the role of government, which interestingly enough, previously has been seen as the main censorship of information, actually has to reinvent its role and finds this very sort of sensible and sensitive balance of actually helping to set the frame, the regulation, the rules, so that we can have different opinions, but we have common sort of departure points on facts. So disinformation is obviously the biggest fight is not about us having different opinions, but actually it's to the level of facts. And I think that's where we really, when we unwrap the whole disinformation big puzzle and challenge, we have to start with is actually reestablishing the facts and a credible source of information where people can rely. Because it would be very difficult for us to agree on anything or have a conversation on anything if we would not have a commonly acceptable facts or known facts. And I think that's the big part of the work we have. So what I try to sort of, in a very short way, put that the role of government has come back to sit at the table and actually together with the stakeholders of those who innovate and invent and lead these huge companies or, thoughts or academia part and try to and innovate how we actually can protect and save that magic tools that we have created in a digital way in order to work it for us, not against us.
Thank you, Eva. I can only add that actually also NATO Secretary General this morning in his opening remarks emphasized that in fight against disinformation, we can develop different strategies, we can develop different tools, but the most crucial point is that we have facts, and that these facts and truth is available. Therefore, actually, you're
I agree,
on the same page. Yeah.
Right. I think that we need the core elements, and then we have to start somewhere, because we want to protect freedom of speech, and we want to have opinions, because through those debates we can come to the better solutions. But it's very difficult to have a discussion if we would not agree on common facts. If me and you would not agree that November 18th is when, Latvian independence, I mean, how we would celebrate, how we would be, how the fabric of our nation would be, how we would proceed if we could not agree on facts. And while it sounds sometimes really funny, but you would not believe what the statistics that people already challenge whether the Earth is round or flat. We have really gone to the very basic facts. And of course, the discussion here right now is very valid because it touches our health. And health is mostly based on facts. We cannot really treat ourselves without proper facts.
Yes.
So I think that makes this topic crucial in this particular year, besides the fact that it touches every field of our life.
Yes, indeed. And now let's turn to Hannes. Hannes, hello. You are a professional from the field of Stratcom, and I think you will understand me when I say that bad news is good news. Or in other words, that scandals, rumors, conspiracy theories, they tend to be more interesting, they tend to be more appealing, and in the digital age, it is especially dangerous. Nevertheless, research shows that scientific research, official and analytical information still has its say in perception of societies. And my question is, what is the potential of rational, clear and correct information, and how to communicate it attractively? Hannes, we don't hear you. Please unmute your microphone.
Yes, thank you very much. I had a dialogue with the conference host here. Yes, and thanks for kind invite to this panel. Great. Same panel with also a couple of former colleagues from Brussels. I would say that you are completely right that rational, actual information has its clear potential, but what it really, based on the example of this spring, what it really showed to us as a government of a rather small country in Europe, it really showed that what government has to do in the times like we had this spring is just to make this information available in more channels, and to make the governmentally vetted, factual, correct information available in channels that people actually use. And so this was a very important starting point for us this spring, when we actually understood what we were actually facing. So what it really meant for us, and what is probably our experience from this spring, is that firstly, what you have to do in order to make this happen, you have to consolidate your efforts. Secondly, you have to integrate different communication channels that the government is using. And thirdly, as I already alluded, you have to go to new channels. So if you make such a, if you break down the challenge in such a way, then we realized also that technology could help us. So how we approached it this spring, and how we are, and obviously we are not going to waste a good crisis here in Estonia, and we are keeping building our crisis communication system in such a way. We have developed a concept which is called single point of information, which is it's not particularly technologically advanced, but the trick with any innovation, I guess, is that the innovation is never in the technology itself, but the way how you can use it. So what we actually did was, when we were faced with a massive need for correct answers from our population, and when we realized that we have to bring those to new channels, then we basically created a government-wide content management system, which actually started to feed both channels that were sort of old school and also new school channels. So old school channel, I mean the state helpline, which we created during the crisis of the spring and hot times, and which is still up. And down to the new channels, which is, for example, we created a governmental chatbot, which was able to answer the question, across the COVID regulation, which was a huge load for any channel. So basically, what we did was to make it possible for all the agencies and governmental departments actually to manage their content on the COVID regulation, so to say, in real time, and to make it so therefore we sort of reduced the attack surface for any disinformation or misinformation. But how we actually did, or what was the end result, and I would just maybe bring in just one sort of topic here. And here I would say that we did quite all right, because in a way, and the best example for that was our own Russian-speaking population in Estonia, which we are used to talk and we are used to, bring in as an example as the prime target for any mis or disinformation, right? So what we actually saw this spring was that when our own government was out there with your own factually correct information, then there were even times this spring when the Russian-speaking population was even more eager to follow the government regulation than the Estonian-speaking population, which was a very... And secondly, what we saw as well was that we saw a huge rise in the numbers related to our own national broadcasting Russian channels, which was a very, very interesting thing to see as well, which we didn't actually even prior to what we had this spring, we didn't even expect it to happen so sharply. So how can I conclude? I would say that if governments make the information available to people in the channels that the people actually use, and therefore try to reduce the attack surface, then it's probably a good opportunity used. So I guess I'll stop here for a moment.
Hannes, thank you very much. I think it is high time to dive right into audience questions, and I'd like to ask all the panelists answer briefly so that we can answer as many questions as possible. So, and the first question goes to Liga from the audience, and the question is the concentration of cyber infrastructure, cloud software among a few key players an inherent safety threat?
Thank you. I would argue that while I understand this is a concern at this point, I think that there is quite a diverse marketplace for cloud services at this time. And while it may sometimes seem that there are a few players, it's quite obvious it's quite evident that there are European players, there are players from the US that are better known, but there are a wide variety of cloud services that are available. We focus on providing the highest level of security for these cloud services, which is maybe a concern that should be addressed as well, is how secure are cloud services and how we can raise the awareness about the very high level of cloud services that there's a skepticism for these days, and how those cloud services can be used for different types of digital transformation issues.
Thank you, Liga, very much. Then we have a question from Melissa Fleming, who is United Nations Under Secretary General for Global Communication. And I would like Eva to take this question. And she asks, with the advent of social media, we face an infodemic. This is what our panel discussion is about. And the result is a media landscape that is polluted with people being exposed to misinformation and conspiracy theories that can be harmful to themselves and us all. In addition to supporting our campaign, Verified, we know it, which is designed to make science-based content go viral while combating misinformation, what role do you see for your government in informing and engaging your public in the social media age? Please, Eva.
Thanks, and I think it is a sort of good and difficult question, and it refers already to some of the points mentioned through the panel. I think one is that it is that actually factual, scientific, and truthful information is boring. And you know, the current information space is built on emotionally sort of driving information. So we tend to watch and follow things that creates our emotions and then sort of exacerbates them. And that is a challenge. So that's not something how government communicates. I could not imagine a tweet or sort of a press release that would be emotionally exploding. And then that's sort of how do you get that information to people? And I think that's where the job is actually of professional media. And then I think we have to find the ways and role how we support them, not only sort of by finances, which obviously is also a core, one of the core elements, how the media can actually survive in the new digital environment, which requires the traditional media to adjust and change. But also, how do we flat that curve, which I think technically could be possible discussing together, sitting down with stakeholders, with companies and academia. How do we get rid of that amplification that is created by bots, that is done artificially, that is driven by certain data and emotions? So we don't want a censorship, but we want to flatten the curve of sort of false and disinformation, and we want to give more space to professional, boring sometimes, or a good quality material that is not any more boring because media evolves. But it's about sort of giving more space, and that's where I see it's actually should be this combined effort that we should work both with technological means, but we also have to put effort in professional media and quality products. But we have to give them that space. It's not possible otherwise to really reach the people.
Yes, thank you, Eva. And now we have a direct video question from Mr. Nguyen Anh Tuan, who represents the Boston Global Forum. Please, the floor is yours.
Sound?
Oh, sound, we don't hear you. Excuse me. Please unmute your microphone.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I have comments and no question. The first, that is, I missed Riga. Last year, we have wonderful conference. And this year, we cannot do in person. But I think great conference online, and I great congratulation for Latvia and Lato. And the second, I think our speakers have great thoughts and thinkings and research to show problem. I think that is a wonderful talk already. And I have some solution. That is from Boston Global Forum. We think about that, and we create and have initiative that is social contract for the IIH. The President Vic Freiberger also co-author for this. With these standards, norms, we can show that issue. And the second, how we can apply and make it happen, that we develop AI and digital international accord. As the Governor Michael Dukakis and father of Internet Vincent Cole, and we are building. The third, that is how to deploy with this accord. If we succeed, we go for set up democratic alliance on digital governance, and also to practice for the people, for the citizen. We build a model, AIWS city of digital virtual city, to respect norm standards for good information for our democratic value. That is our solution. We build intellectual society to make the society an upgrade, civil society to intellectual society, a better society. So that is my comment, and I think that is great session, and congratulations, and thank for speakers, great value to learn. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Indeed, we would be much happier to see you in person here in Riga, but let's hope for the best, and hopefully we will see you next year. Now, we have a question from the audience, and I would like Phil to answer it. Disinformation and its dissemination through popular social media is a novel threat, but have we measured exactly how impactful is it? We know that it happens, but does it impact our behavior in a very strong manner? Does it impact our way of thinking, our perception? What would be your answer to this?
That is a really good question. In fact, it is one of the top questions that researchers all over the world are trying to explore now. It is a much harder question than the question of exposure, which is the first one that we were able to study thanks to the availability of data from various social media sources. So we can tell how viral something is going, we can tell how many people are exposed to it, we can tell how many people reshare it, but we cannot tell how that will translate into, for example, a change in voting. And this is especially hard to explore because we cannot run ethical experiments where when we have a control environment and we expose some people to misinformation and some people not, and then see how they vote. This would, of course, be completely unethical. So we cannot do that. And so we have to find other ways. We can do experiments in the lab, and those are done. And they generally suggest that people's opinions, of course, are shaped by the information to which they are exposed. Think, for example, of marketing and advertising, right? If showing information to people did not affect their behaviors, then we would not have advertising, we would not have marketing. The whole, industry of social media platforms would not exist the way it is today, based on ads. So there is good reason to believe that there is an impact, but this impact is very hard to measure. Let us keep in mind, however, that sometimes even very small effects can have large consequences. Let's Look at the current US elections or even the ones 4 years ago. They are decided by few thousands of votes in few key states. And so all you have to do to have a huge impact is to convince a tiny fraction, a very small fraction of 1% of the voters to not go to vote. And you can do that by sharing misinformation about these people. And so we see massive campaigns to do that. Another example is the pandemic. We see a lot of misinformation about the pandemic, and we see that a lot of people believe it, and we see it reflected in their behaviors. We see people who refuse, for example, to wear masks. And we see that is then mirrored in expansion of the pandemic. And in our lab, we actually conduct some surveys to look at how many people believe misinformation narratives to which they are exposed. And the results are kind of scary. We see that close to half of the US population believes absurd conspiracies, such as QAnon. They believe that that large numbers of American peoples and politicians are involved in pedophilia and cannibalism, absurd things, and yet people do believe them. So yeah, the impact is probably important, but it is very, very hard to measure, and there is a lot of ongoing research on that.
Thank you, Phil, for your answer. And now I have a question for Hannes. Thank you for sharing Estonia's experience. It is a good example of national policies. But in an interconnected world, the response must be international. Do you have any ideas about possible European Union solutions?
Yes, thank you very much. I believe that, how to summarize, EU can provide a lot of very good value, but I guess everything has to start, as was already also the question in cybersecurity years ago. Everything has to start from the responsibility of member states, and the key question is how to motivate member states to do actually more in all that. So I guess a very small first practical step would be to raise the efforts in terms of media literacy, in motivating member states, for example, through funding or other ways, to do more in that, because currently I would say, and I would argue that the mechanisms that EU has in place, they could be used for that, but it's not they are not exactly perfectly fit for that. But maybe coming back to what was already said earlier, I think. I think governments should not also be scared in going also and in trying to use also these social media tools that we are that we are used to talking about as if something that we have to regulate and that we have to work on such a way that you can actually use also those tools to bring out your own message. And because if you know that the people are out there, just go ahead and use it. And I hope that in a year or a couple of years we are there. But at least in policy-wise, we have taken this approach.
Thank you, Hannes, very much. And we have one more question regarding the European Union, and it goes to Eva. What expectations do you have regarding the EU Digital Services Act and European Democracy Action Plan?
Mm-hmm. Very good, and thanks. It actually kind of connects to what already Hannes spoke to, mm-hmm. And I think it is sort of on number levels. I'm really glad Europe is having that discussion, and I do come back to that regulation part that we do need to find. And I think GDPR is a good example. I know it's heavily criticized, and we can question how much tangible result it has brought in a practical level, but it has clearly raised awareness. It has put a lot of thought on companies, how to tailor their tools, how to build their services, respecting privacy and data. So I think it is a good example, and I have clearly expectations that in this joint action in Europe, we can come to a better understanding vis-a-vis big tech companies and big platforms, because without a common voice, we all individually, it's very difficult for Latvia to discuss with Facebook, with Twitter, with the platforms that our societies are using, and we see the abuse of them. And I see that's where the Europe is global player, but let's be honest, the decision depends also on us. It's not somebody there in Brussels who will decide, it's us, here in Latvia, in Tallinn, in other capitals. The governments have to come to common understanding what that rules and tools look like. So I have a hope. I think we have quite a bit of awareness of the problem. I think COVID and misinformation around that has put also a pressure on us, because we understand that the next thing that will be coming is vaccine, and the misinformation or disinformation around that. And we know already from previous experience that vaccines will work if they will be used. We are democratic states. We probably will not force people, most likely not force people to use vaccines, but we will have to understand, we will have to find this common understanding of why we do as a society certain things. So I have a great hope, but I don't want to push and say, hey, that's the Brussels who have to decide. We actually, all member states, we have to be really thoughtful and come together and agree on these concrete actions.
Thank you, Eva. And let's finalize this panel with the final round. And this question goes to every one of you. And it is a bit provocative. Ray Kurzweil, Google's director of engineering and a well-known futurist, predicts that by 2029, computers will have human-level intelligence. But by 2045, the society will have reached the point of technological singularity, which is a point where technological superintelligence becomes uncontrollable, irreversible, and dictates the humanity. My question is, what is your craziest, boldest ideas how our world will look in 25 years in terms of democracy, technologies, and spread of information? Let's start with Liga, please.
You put me in the most difficult position. Everybody else has a moment to reflect. I had a bit of a different conclusion prepared, but I can try to adjust and focus on what needs to be done in the time before that period, so that humanity is not computer dominated, rather than that humans can be a bit more analytical in what they see around them and how they react to that. We see that due to disinformation or due different political needs, COVID cures make people run to the hospital because they have information that is certainly simply not true. I mean, we have to look at how issues such as training people to understand how technology works, even at the basic level, has to be ingrained in how society develops through education, in the workplace, and how we interact with each other. Only 4 years ago, we didn't have the kind of applications on social media that would alert you that maybe what you're looking at is fake. So during the elections, you were notified that perhaps this information on stealing the elections within the few hours of polling and so forth, it may not be accurate. I think we just have to look at the fact that the trends of geopolitical discussions have ignored the influence of technology a bit too long. So whether if it's at the conference level or the education level, European Council, the North Atlantic Council, anywhere we're discussing the future of the development of humanity or security and defense, the integration of the tech sector and giving their input is not only a nice to have anymore, but it's quite mandatory. So whether you're looking at whether technology is fit for European values or Europe is ready for the technology that is available and developing, we have to see how that integration between governments in the private sector and also civil society can work so that we don't have these kind of predictions in 50 years that we're in a computer-dominated society.
Thank you, Liga, very much. Hannes, your perspective?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would not be able probably to tell you the wildest. I would not be in the position to pick it out like here, but I guess there are certain questions ahead also. So because and I don't know if we have to go down to the very questions related to social or societal contract. I don't know that, but there are definitely things ahead of us. But one maybe a little bit more down to the earth solution, and it is also indeed political, is the question of, I would say that the current world is characterized by the complete acceptance by the whole political spectrum and the elite of the society, I would say, that the emotion of what any fact creates is more important than the fact itself. And it really is also connected to what Eva was saying earlier, how sometimes facts are dry and not really interesting. So, but I would say that the question of addressing the emotion, the question of emotion in this equation is actually important, and I would say that these are only politicians that can do that. But going more to a even more practical level, I would come back to the question of media literacy. We have to work more heavily on that, because our research here in Estonia tells us that it's roughly between 20 to 30% of people who actually don't really make a difference, who even if they understand that this is what they are seeing is crap, they are still forwarding it to their friends and colleagues. So for example, with a heavier work on media literacy, we can, for example, address this problem, and then go on from there.
Thank you, Hannes, very much. And now, Eva, your short predictions, how will world look like?
Well, since you quoted, I will refer back and say, well, if Google has a vision, they actually has a capacity to implement. And what I would say is that his dream of future might also become my nightmare, or at least nightmare for my children, as that I clearly don't want. And in order so that innovation and that all futuristic perspectives that we can see in technologies would not become my nightmare, I would see a precondition that it is human-centered. It is made for humans. Those are tools that help people better educated, that help people's health, that we can do so many things with those tools for humans, but it's not for companies or for companies' benefits. It doesn't exclude that companies can profit, but we have to put back the logic that the services and the innovation and what we build really serves people. And these are preconditions that I would sort of think we need to work right now, and we need to make sure that it actually really serves people in future, not that people become sort of a feed or a chunk of data for those technologies to exist, but rather other way around.
Thank you very much. And Phil, what is your take?
Well, let me start by saying, with all due respect to Kurzweil, these singularity predictions have been happening for the last 60 years, and we keep moving the prediction 10 or 20 years in the future. I'm very skeptical about that, because we don't even know how human intelligence works. So how can we claim that we will have computers powerful enough to overtake it? So anyway, setting that aside, certainly the issue about technology and the risks that are posed by our fast advancement of technology is an important one. And other people have already made excellent points. Maybe I can add one or two. One is the fact that technologies are, as you said, Gunda, at the beginning, technology is neutral, right? It's not good or bad. It's usually developed for good intentions and purposes. And then after a while, people figure out how to abuse it. It has happened, with the press. It has happened with the telegraph and the radio and the TV and the phone. And there was always a stage in which we thought, oh my gosh, this technology is going to bring us down. And then eventually society has adapted. I hope that it will be the same. I'm an optimist for social media technology. Yes, it has lowered the friction and lowered the cost of producing and spreading information. It has had very good application. Now we realize that it also has very high risks. And hopefully through a mix of improving the technology and regulation and media literacy, as Hannes said, we will learn to cope. It will never go away, because as long as there is, people have incentives, whether they're financial, political, or whatever, to manipulate opinions, and this will never change, technology will continue to be abused. But I hope that we'll find a good balance. And the other point, we talked about media literacy. Think about the technologists like us who develop these technologies, and they do it assuming that they will be used for good use. And often we don't think until later about the ethical implication of that technology and how it can be abused. So we are pushing ahead funding research in AI, and then we realize, that AI can be biased and can lead to algorithms that discriminate or to the creation of deep fakes, as we've discussed earlier. So I hope that technologists themselves will also be better educated into thinking about the ethics of the impact of the technology that they develop. So, we teach students about machine learning and AI and data mining, and we need to teach them along with that also the ethics of the technology that they develop. And hopefully that can help us think a little bit ahead, stay ahead of the curve about the potential implications of the technologies that we develop. And hopefully, if we can do that better, we won't go into this kind of nightmarish scenario. So I prefer to stay a little bit positive.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all the panelists for your engagement, for your insights. Thank you for joining us. I want to say thank you also to our audience for all those people who sent questions to our panelists. And please stay around for the next session, which will deal with the United States of America and China in the context of pandemics reshaping the global order. Thank you very much for participation. Thank you very much for watching us. Please stay tuned.